Hello everyone and welcome to ArthaPoint CUT MA English preparation. Today we would be moving to a very important era in the history of English literature, that is the Age of Chaucer. Now, one thing to know about the Age of Chaucer is that this is a stage, this is a period that we will be talking about that changed the course of English literature and made English into what it is today. Right? So, this is a very critical age when it comes to the history of English literature. And you would get at least 2 or 3 questions from this particular period. So, you must be well aware about this period. Now, before moving to who was Chaucer, his important works, other important figures of this era, the very first thing that we want to discuss is what was the period like? What was the geopolitical or social situation during this period? Because you need to know the social conditions of the period, because the complete basis of Chaucer's work, the complete basis of other poets that were writing in this period are based on the given social conditions, the given political conditions, and given scenarios that were happening in this period, right? Now, there we would be discussing about 3 major things, 3 major crises, so to say, that happened during this period. The first is the 100-Year War that was there from a period of 1337 to 1453. So it was approximately 116 years, right? Next, we would be discussing about the Black Death, or what we call as the plague. And third, we would be talking about, again, a very important period, the Peasants' Revolt. Right? So these 3 major things, these 3 major events that happened during this period formed what the literature would be like and what the literature of the period, the Chaucerian period, is. Right? Now, let us first talk about the 100-Year War. Now, if you would have seen the earlier videos, you would have known that post-Anglo-Saxon period, Anglo-Normans took over, and with Anglo-Normans coming in, it meant that French took over England. Right? Now, the 100-Year War was a fight or a war for land. So now what happened was the French conquered England. The French were ruling England, and with the death of the ruler of France, the England people, the English people, the British people wanted their land back, right? So they wanted the holding that France had, and therefore this war began. So this war was majorly for the holding of land that was with William the Conqueror. So Anglo-Norman, who was the ruler of Anglo-Normans, it was William the Conqueror, right? With his death, this war began. Though the French eventually won the war, the French eventually won. There were 3 major battles that were won by the English, right? So there were 3 major battles. So the 100-Year War, it wasn't like that. It was one war that was happening. There were segregated. There were several battles that were happening, and out of These battles, there were three major battles that the English people won. The first is the Battle of Crecy in the year 1346. Second was Battle of Poitiers in the year 1356. And third was the Battle of Agincourt in the year 1450. Now, why were these three battles important? Now, these three battles were important because with every winning, there was a sense of English. I mean, the English were getting more and more further from the French, right? And there was a sense of unity that they were finding amongst them. Now, the question comes that out of so many battles that were happening, why and how did the English manage to win against the army of French? This is something that is a little interesting to know, that the English used long bows while the French used short bows. What does this mean? Now, जब हम archery करते हैं और जब हम so archery जब हम कर रहे हैं, so French के पास जो आपके धनुष बाण थे वो शॉर्ट बोज थे. नाउ शॉर्ट बोज मीन कि अगर वो धनुष बाण को खींचेंगे, it would go up until only a small distance. It would only cover a small distance. While the long bows that were adopted by the English people, they could travel larger areas, right? So that was why they went. Sorry, that was why they won. Now, eventually in 1453, the French won the battle and defeated the English in the Battle of Castile. Right? Now, another important thing that I have missed is that why did this war eventually start? Right? Now, of course, we know that the French had the English holding, so the England people wanted the lands back. Another thing to know, important thing to know, is that during that period, England was ruled by King Edward III, right? While France was ruled by King Charles IV. Now, King Charles IV, he died without any heir, right? So he died without any heir. So there was nobody to rule France after that. Now, Elizabeth was the mother of King Edward III, and she was the sister of King Charles IV. So she declared that since there is no one to rule France, France would now be ruled by King Edward. So till now, France was ruling England. Elizabeth declared that now England would be ruling France since there is only one blood relative who's left. So she declared that since King Edward is the blood relative of King Charles IV and there's no heir, so he would be ruling France. So that was a core issue that led to this 100-year war, right? So I hope that till now I have made myself clear. We have discussed the 100-year war. Now, further, we would also be discussing how this impacted the people of England, how this impacted the people of France, of course. So first thing is the 100-year war. Now, let us move on to the second issue. I think I've missed one slide. The second issue is the Black Death. So Black Death was a very, very important, a very significant period, a very significant issue that happened during this period. Now, what was Black Death? Black Death was the plague. Now, what happened during this period that Black Death rampantly spread, right? So it was killing people and thousands of people were dead. Now, Black Death, the plague was caused by rats, right? And anybody who had the plague or who got the plague died within a period of 5 days. So understand the intensity of the plague. Of course, let's just see. So in this year of 2020, we have seen COVID-19, right? Again, a very deadly virus came. A lot of people died. This Black Death, the plague, had even more intensity. So people were dying within 5 days of their exposure, right? Now, what happened during this Black Death was that people started dying, right? So they started questioning the power of God and the power of church. So, of course, their loved ones were dying. They got a sense that neither the clergies that were trying to heal them, nor their God, nor their church. Nothing could stop it, nothing could prevent it, nothing could save them, right? So this was a period when medical sciences and education started booming. People understood that only science could help them, only education could help them, only medicine could help them. No superstition was coming in handy, and therefore there was this inner surge wherein people started disbelieving in the church. People started disbelieving in the clergy. They questioned कि अगर हमें कोई बचा ही नहीं पा रहा है, तो what is the reason that why should we believe in God, right? So again, this was an important period. Again, we would see how this impacted literature, right? Now, third was the Peasants' Revolt. Now, the Peasants' Revolt was led by Wat Tyler and John Ball. Now, of course, during this revolt, both the leaders died, both were hanged. Now, what was this Peasants' Revolt, right? So, after Black Death, people started questioning their church, people started questioning their rulers, people started questioning their king. They were in this whole disbelief. There was a sense of insecurity that was there, which led to the Peasants' Revolt. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind that with this Black Death, with this Peasants' Revolt, in the background, there was this 100-year war that was continuously happening. Now, this was all happening simultaneously, right? Now, one of the reasons that this Peasants' Revolt took place was the fact that even after Black Death, even after this 100 years revolt, the taxes that were imposed on them were increasing day by day. Now, why were these taxes increasing? These taxes were increasing so that the ruler could support their 100-year war, right? So people were questioning why and even in this 100-year war, a lot of people died, right? And so one place there was this 100-year war, people were dying. Another was this Black Death, people were dying. So everybody was questioning why should we pay heavy taxes to support something that is killing our own people, right? So that was one of the reasons that the Peasants' Revolt took place. Now, the peasants captured the Tower of London. So this Tower of London was a place where all the aristocrats lived, right? So the king and his knights and everybody lived in this Tower of London, right? So one important thing that was happening throughout this period was that slowly people were realizing that English was the only language that they're meant to speak. So till now, till the Anglo-Normans, French took over, right? Now they started removing French from their culture and they started adapting English, right? So there are three important dates that you must remember. That English became the language of court in the year 1362. It became the language of parliament in the year 1363, and it became the language of school, which means education started, they started imparting education in English in the year 1386. Right, French was removed from England. So these three things are something that forms the basis, that forms the complete basis of this period. And when we would discuss about Geoffrey Chaucer and his age and other writers that were there in the age, you would see a heavy impact of Black Death, a heavy impact of this 100 Years' War, a heavy impact of Peasants' Revolt in their literature, in their writing, right? That is why you should be clear about the socio-political, geopolitical situation of it. Now, let us move on to Geoffrey Chaucer, the poet, the writer, the politician, the knight, and what not. So, do you understand the significance of this person in the history of English literature? That a complete era is devoted to him. The complete era is known as the Age of Chaucer. Right. So, Chaucer is called the father of English literature. Right. He, first is that you must know that he is father of English literature. He was the first finder of the language. Right. And he was the first, this is again important, to be buried in the Poets' Corner of Westminster Abbey. Right. Now, usually aristocrats were buried here. He was a common man, and he was the first to be buried at the Poets' Corner. Now, when we talk of Geoffrey Chaucer, his life could be divided into three parts, right? First is the French period. Still, there was this French influence that was there. The 100 Years' War has just begun. This was the period from 1343 to 70. Second was the Italian period. This was from 1370 to 83. And last was the English period. And this was the period when he came up with his well-known work, that is the Canterbury Tales. Right. So this was the English period. Now, let me quickly give you a snippet of the history of Geoffrey Chaucer. Now, when we talk of Geoffrey Chaucer and the French period in his life, so during this period, he worked as a public servant to the, let us just write it down. During the French period, he worked as a public servant, right, to the Countess of, to Countess Elizabeth of Ulster. Right. She was the wife of Lionel, who was the firstborn son of Edward III. So we know that Edward III was ruling at that time. He had a son Lionel, who had a wife Elizabeth, and he was a public servant to Countess Elizabeth of Ulster. Right. Another thing to know about this period was that he went on to fight in the 100-Year War. Now, he was held as a ransom because he had ties with the royal family. He was kidnapped, and it was King Edward III who paid his ransom, who freed him from the French. This was first thing. Now let us come to the Italian period. Now during the Italian period, he controlled the customs, and he was sent on a lot of diplomatic missions. So he went to France, he went to Spain, he went to Italy. Do you see the amount of exposure he had, the amount of people that he met? And again, it was these people, it was their stories, it was the narratives of these people that gave him this complete idea of forming a literature altogether. Right, so first he went on to the 100-Year War, he was kidnapped, then he came back, he controlled customs, he went from one place to another, and it was in Italy that he married Philippa Pan, right? And third was the English period. Now, during this period, he served as the Justice of Peace for Kent, and he eventually became a knight. So, during this period, he became controller of customs, and during the English period, he became a knight, right? So when we talk of the whole lifespan of Geoffrey Chaucer, this is something that you must be aware of. These three periods, on as a bird eye view, you must know these three periods, right? Now, when we talk of the great Geoffrey Chaucer, one thing you must know that he was the first poet who chose English over French and Latin. So we knew during the Anglo-Norman period, we discussed that French became the language of the aristocrats, right? Now, Geoffrey Chaucer was the first who decided that all his writings, all his works would be in English. And he gave rise to what we know as the East Midland dialect, right? So what we know as the East Midland dialect, and eventually the English that is coming out of our mouth today, the English that we read, the works that we read, the basis was set by Geoffrey Chaucer, and the dialect that he formed was the East Midland dialect. Now, this was a past year question as well. So you must know what dialect was established by Geoffrey Chaucer, because this could come in your examination, right? So past year question was that modern English emerged from which dialect? So you can write down the question. And the answer is East Midland dialect, right? So with this, I would like to end today's session. We would be discussing the works of Geoffrey Chaucer. We would be discussing other important poets of the age in the upcoming video. Till then, if you have any questions for whatever we have discussed, if you have any questions, you can get in touch with us directly, or you can write down in the comment section below. In case you did not understand some part of it, of course, you can get back to us. For a detailed course, you can reach out to us at 83686 63950. Thank you so much. Take care. I wish you all the best.